Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Cindie Chavez here. Today is Wednesday, August the 29th, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, your second daily dose of happy for the day. We hope your day's going really well. As Cindie and I were talking about before the show, my day's going very well because despite the fact that we have a massive heat and humidity front, or I guess, I'm not sure what it is exactly, but a weather system hanging over New England. Despite that, I've been inside in the air conditioning all day, so I don't even notice it. So my day's going great from that perspective, right?
Well, that's most of my days because it's so hot here that we always have the air conditioning. And since, I'm inside in the office, but I have a big window that I can enjoy looking at the birds and the trees. And it was so funny because I had a client tell me that it was 70 degrees and, of course, a client that was in another state. And I thought about it later. I thought, well, I can say that's wonderful, but I'm here in the air conditioning, so I can pretend it's any temperature I want outside.
That's true.
I don't have to say, oh, it's so hot here. It is hot here, but I'm inside.
That's very true.
Perspective.
Well, actually, where I do the podcast is in our second bedroom. It's an office space that we use it as an office space. And there's a window that faces right outside, and it's normally a great view, except in the afternoon it gets direct sun, which means it just boils with heat. So I always have to have it blocked off while we're doing the podcast just to keep the room cool. Otherwise, it's like a sauna in here.
Right. I know. Well, it's interesting because, that made me think about times when we complain about things that aren't really affecting us in the moment.
Yeah.
Which is probably most of the time.
Oh, yeah.
I told that story about having a conversation with someone who was complaining. And it was just like, oh my goodness. And I understand, like, we all have bad days where we're just whining, but later in the day, that's when we were out doing something and I was relating my day because we often ask each other, how was your day? Right. So we were just talking about, and I said, oh my goodness, this conversation I had. And I started recounting the complainers conversation. And so really what I was doing was I was complaining that this person was complaining. And of course the response I got was, oh my gosh, it's like this big cloud of complaining. And all of a sudden, you'll remember this story because all of a sudden I had felt fine all day. And all of a sudden my throat started hurting.
Oh, yes.
Hurting, and I was like, there it is. There, all my complaining just showed up. But the truth was I did have that experience, but then I was recounting it later when it didn't need to be recounted. And I was drumming it all up again. Doesn't Esther say, or Abraham talks about beating a drum, I was beating that same drum again. And yeah, we do that a lot of times.
Well, we also forget
about the hot weather when I'm inside in the air conditioning. Why would I complain about it? I'm not even out there.
That's right. Exactly right. And we also forget. I mean, I see this. I just saw this today. I saw this on a Facebook post. Someone was talking about how there used to be this great manifester. They manifested all these wonderful things in the past. Now they can't manifest anything. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I know that's not true because we manifest everything that's in our lives. It's a question of whether we like it or not, but
right, you're just not manifesting the thing
that you wanted, right? And I actually wrote something back to her to that effect that, well, everything that is in your life right now, you manifested. I think what you're really saying is you don't like what you manifested. She actually gave me a love heart on that one. You're like, yeah, okay, you're right. But
well, that's the reason why I kind of make a point often to say conscious creation or that we are conscious creators.
Right.
We are consciously and deliberately using the law of attraction to our benefit. Right?
We're trying to anyway.
We're working on that. So we're using it consciously, but everyone's always affected by it.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's always creating whatever we're creating.
And it really pisses me off, I have to tell you, because I'll go through a day and certain things happen that I didn't want to happen. I said, darn, I did it again.
Well, the way I look at it is sometimes it takes us a little while to become aware of the connection between certain things. Like the reason why I made that connection that day is because we had been on the podcast reading a chapter in the book Money and the Law of Attraction. We had been reading a chapter about physical health and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a paragraph in there that said something like, if you're complaining about physical pain or discomfort in your body, it is because you were already complaining about something else. And it hit me, that connection between, like all the complaining that we do about this other stuff, it ends up eventually, if we complain long enough, it's going to start manifesting in our physical body, and we're going to feel it as pain or discomfort and dis-ease. And so we had, talked about that morning, and then boom. But, if that would have happened, I don't know, 5 years ago, a month ago, a week ago, I don't know, I might have not put the two together.
Not surprising.
And so, like, over time, how you make a certain connection, like you eat a certain thing and then it gives you a rash or a headache, and you don't put them together. You say, oh, I got this weird headache. And then maybe a month later you eat that thing again and it gives you the same symptom. And then like the third or fourth time you go, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Every time I eat this thing happens. They're connected. So I think we all go through our day saying, oh my gosh, look what I missed.
I think you're right. Although I have to tell you, along the same lines of what you're talking about right there, I have often wondered, how is it that the entire population of the planet for so many generations, for so many centuries, could have missed the connection between thinking all these nasty thoughts and getting sick?
I don't know.
How does that happen? Because once that was explained, I said, well, duh, of course. But nobody thought of that before. How is that possible? I don't get it.
Well, I mean, I think we have a good amount of evidence, scientific evidence, that stress is the precursor or the cause of almost every physical malady we have, right? Not all of them maybe, but I want to say stress is makes a good contribution towards all of those things. And so
yeah, it shows up on pretty much any list of symptoms for any condition you can think of. Stress is almost always on there.
Yeah. And so that, I think, is the connection. It might not be in the same words, but it's definitely vibration.
But even there, I mean, how often do people connect stress with thinking negatively? I mean,
I think more and more.
Well, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know when it started being connected, but I know at least 20 years ago when I was working for the naturopaths, we had that connection. And it wasn't a law of attraction kind of thing. It was just that it was a positive thinking thing, if there's a difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, I think there's a difference, but it was known that when we continually think negative thoughts, it causes stress, and that stress ends up showing up in the body.
That's an interesting question, though. You said you think there is a difference between positive thinking and law of attraction. I suspect you're probably right, because they're really not the same thing. But what do you see as being the difference between them?
Well, I mean, positive thinking is the belief that when we think positive thoughts, we change our experience. Law of attraction is just whatever we focus on, we get more of.
So it's a little bit broader in that sense.
I mean, they kind of go hand in hand, and we often, in a conscious effort to work it, right, to work the law of attraction, we decide we need to think more positively.
Yeah.
I think the important thing to remember is that, we can't turn a blind eye to things that don't seem to be going right. We need to be able to see them and not ignore them, because a lot of times things that get ignored grow into something terrible. Right? I mean,
true.
You ever seen what mold does, or something that gets a weed in the garden, or cancer, or there's lots of things that we can just act like it's not there,
right,
and it's going to get worse and worse. But instead of looking the other way, we just focus on the solutions. That's the positive thinking part.
It's also the part that's hardest to remember, because most often when there's something negative going on, what we're focused on is there's this negative thing going on. And I can't stop paying attention to the fact that this negative thing is really getting to me.
Yeah, especially if it hurts.
Yeah, especially then. Yeah.
It's hard to ignore,
Yeah.
when it hurts. So pain speaks pretty loudly.
It takes a lot of attention and a lot of focus and a lot of determination to change your attention to what you want instead of that pain when you're experiencing especially chronic pain. And I know because I was experimenting with that this past May, and it does take a lot. It takes a lot of focus to do that.
I'll tell you, I call it the magic trick in our family.
Oh.
It's actually a hypnosis kind of thing, but you can do it for yourself. But it's something that I actually did this last night. I in the past, I would say that I would think it didn't work really well with a headache as opposed to like other pain I might feel.
Mm-hmm.
But I did it effectively in the middle of the night when I woke up because you know this. I've been suffering with the migraine for the last 3 days.
Well, you're getting better from your migraine's almost gone. Your headache is better.
It's almost gone.
Your head is almost cleared up.
And I did this in the night, and I was talking about this morning. I said I did the magic trick, and it actually worked. But what it is the first step is to define for yourself that unit of discomfort on a scale of 1 to 10.
Mm-hmm.
And I always define it for myself in the same way I'll make the definition for a client talking about anything if we use a scaling question. So if I was coaching you and you had said you wanted a certain thing. Okay. Let's say you wanted to, move to a certain place or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I was going to ask you a scaling question to figure out how much you really wanted it. I would define it. So I wouldn't just say on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being, you're happy where you are. You really don't, it doesn't matter if you move or not. And 10 being, you are desperate to move there and you are going to do anything to get to that place, anything, right? So it's like, always define it. And with pain, it's the same way. And I usually go, okay, with pain, scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being, it's not really even pain. It's just a sensation that I feel, but it doesn't really hurt anymore. It's just, I notice it maybe not. It's just barely there.
Right.
And 10 being, okay, I think I need to go to the hospital, or I'm going to pass out. The pain's almost that bad, right? So it's 1 to 10.
The worst you've ever felt, really.
I always define it even for myself. I make myself walk through that definition, and then I pick a number. So last night, laying there in bed with this throbbing headache, I walk myself through that definition. 1, barely even there, don't notice it, which is actually where it is right now. 10, I feel like I might get sick or I need to call a doctor. Okay. I said, and really the number will come immediately. And I always tell people when I'm coaching them this way is just go with the number that comes up right away. That's the number. Don't overthink it. So last night I said it's a 7. Okay. So then I asked myself, if this pain in my head had a shape and a color, what would that be?
Ooh, interesting question.
I said, it's shaped like a pine cone. And it was purple.
Ooh.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds painful.
If that thing could hold water, how much water would it hold? I said about a cup. Does it feel hot or cold? Hot. Okay. And I kept asking myself questions like this. And then I said, where are you now on that scale? It was a 4.
Wow.
I said, it's a 4. And suddenly when I said it's a 4, it was the size of a golf ball and it was round and it was like lime green. I don't know why these things happen. And I kept going with it and then I realized that I was waking up to my alarm. It's time to do the morning podcast. And I was like, I went back to sleep when it got to the size of a golf ball. And that whole exercise last night took me the same amount of time it took me right now to tell you about it, which was about 3 minutes. 2 minutes.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And I've done it. I remember being on a road trip and one of the boys was with us and he suddenly said, "Oh man, I'm not feeling too good." And we said, "What's wrong?" He said, "I have a really bad pain right here." And it was in his stomach, in his side. And we weren't at a place where we could just do anything, any kind of treatment or any kind of doctor or any kind of, not even Pepto-Bismol, nothing. We're stuck in the traffic. And I remembered this, and I started asking him these questions, and that's when it got dubbed the magic trip, because he said, "Mom, you are a magician. Like, this thing is gone," and it never came back.
Wow.
And
That's really
sometimes I
good.
forget about it. I don't know why, because it really, really works.
So let's go through the questions again. I mean, let's make a note of it because I'll put it in the notes of the program too.
The first question is always that scaling question.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important that you don't skip it and just say, okay, a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 6. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's important to define the scale. And of course, when it's pain, that's the definition I always use. Is 1 is just, you barely notice it.
Mm-hmm.
You only notice it if you think about it and bring your attention to it. Otherwise, it's not there. 10, it's, like the worst thing ever.
Right.
And then you ask yourself, where are you on that scale? And then the first questions I always use are size and color, or shape and color. And
Okay.
I just start asking descriptive questions like, does it have a temperature? Does it feel hot or cold? Is it smooth or rough? Does it have a texture? If it could hold water, how much would it hold? And I just get creative and think of as many things like that as I can. And then I always go back to the shape and color again. I go, is it still that same shape, or has the color changed?
Okay.
And now where are you on the scale? And this is why it's so important to do that scale, to define that scale at the beginning, because you can tell that it's moved. You can tell that it's gotten better.
So why do you think this works so well? Because, I mean, clearly, just the story that you told of your son and your own experience this morning, clearly this works. Why do you think it works so well?
I think it's because we're putting our attention on somewhere else. In other words, I could be asking you, right, how bad does it hurt? Oh, it's a 7. Really? What does it feel like? Oh, it's throbbing.
Well, it's getting worse, right?
Right? But I'm not asking you, what does it feel like? I'm not asking you, where is it hurting so much? I'm asking you what color it is and what shape it is, and if it could hold water, how much could it hold, and does it have a texture? And your focus is not on the screaming pain. I mean,
True.
I think that's why it works.
Okay, that's a good explanation. I think that makes a lot of sense. Because what you're doing is a couple things. First of all, you're redirecting your attention away from the pain, which is great. That's a very powerful thing to do. And second, you are, in effect, directing attention onto something that is an unexpected alternative. Color, shape. Wait a minute. Since when does pain have a color or a shape? But you're insisting, well, if it had one or the other, what would it be like? So now we have to look at it differently.
Right. And some hypnotists will say to you something more like, imagine that this pain is shaped like a cube and it's green. Watch it as it starts to become smaller. Right. I mean, so it's they're guiding you to, but I find that this works just by asking those questions. It works when I do it with myself.
I would think it would actually be more effective if the person you're doing it for comes up with their own answers rather than being guided on it. Just because when you're being guided, it's so easy to go off the rails. But when you're the one who has to come up with the answers, it refocuses you a bit.
Right. You're engaged in that focusing and trying to find the answer.
Right.
And so, I don't know. It's one of my favorite things. If you're suffering with pain, try it.
Yeah. Well, I'll
and I
definitely
thought about this, I haven't thought about it in a long time. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of pain, so it's not something I'm thinking about all the time.
Right.
But I actually thought about this like the week after you had the knee pain. I was like, oh, I would have loved to be able to share this with you.
I'm going to keep that in mind, and I'm definitely going to put it in the show notes so that anybody who wants to look this up can look it up. I'll make sure we got to make sure that the topic title in some way addresses this, so it's easier to find this particular episode when you're searching the website or searching the web. But we'll come up with a title for that. That's okay. We'll do that. Not sure what it's going to be, but we will.
Right. We were saying before the show, Cindie and Walt discuss the mystery topic.
That's right. It's the mystery topic. We're still figuring out what the topic is, but we're 20 minutes in, so we must be having a good time.
Well, now's probably a good time to invite people to call us.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, maybe they can tell us what the mystery topic is. That would be fun. I think that would be the first time in the history of the show when a caller came in and called us and told us what the topic was. That would be novel. That would be unique.
I think it'd be great.
So if you are listening live right now and you want to tell us what the topic is, please do call. There are a number of ways you can contact us, and all of them are described on the homepage of our website at loatoday.net. But if you want to just call in and you're in the U.S., here's the number to call from the U.S. It's area code 646-876-9923. That's area code 646-876-9923. 9923, and then there's an access code that you dial after you get into the system. That access code sounds like a phone number, but it's just an access code, and it is 860-264-5432. That's 860-264-5432. So by all means, if you're listening live right now, we'd love to talk with you. And we know most of our listeners are the podcast listeners. That's what a podcast is. It's a pre-recorded thing, and they listen to the pre-recorded thing. But more and more people are listening live, so who knows? Maybe we'll get a call today.
It would be great.
It would be.
And while you're there, if you're a new listener, while you're at loatoday.net, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any of the episodes.
Yeah, if you're not a subscriber, definitely do that. And if you are a subscriber, hey, you're not off the hook. You get to do something too. You get to help. Put something on a social media channel about how you're listening to loatoday.net. Because as more and more of us are doing that, we're getting more and more people discovering the show. And I mean, I think we all know what happens when more and more people get a daily dose of happy. They have happier lives. Isn't that a great gift to give to the rest of the population, a happier life?
It's a great gift that we can give everybody that's around us.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? Because energy entrains to itself. So when we have a big dose of happy ourselves and we get around other people notice it. And, think about somebody in your life that's just always happy and fun to be around. Mm-hmm. When we hear their name, we're excited because they're just so much fun. And I think that's important to surround ourselves with people that have a good vibe going on.
I think that's true. It's also something really interesting to pay attention to, that you don't, just because you're putting something on a social media channel doesn't mean that you're doing it for people you know. Wendy and I were talking about how LinkedIn in particular works. I think we were doing it yesterday. That, for instance, if Cindie, if you and I are connected on LinkedIn, we're what they call first connections. And then people that we know that we're also connected to would be like, for the people I know, they become your second connections. The people you know become my first connections. And then the people they know become third connections, and so forth. Well, the beauty of social media is you can post something and maybe your friends don't see it, but a connection of a connection sees it.
Right.
In a way that you never would have expected. So you're actually reaching people you don't even know.
Yes.
Which is really cool.
It is really cool. In fact, I'm glad that it works that way, because I have found a lot of really interesting people that way. Not so much through LinkedIn, but through the other social medias.
Yeah, well, they all do the same thing. Facebook,
right.
Instagram, Twitter. I mean, everything works that same basic principle.
It's interesting because everything works that way.
Yeah, that's the way life works, right?
Like, we're all connected.
Yeah.
There's a book that I'm looking around to see if I brought it in my office. I don't see it. This will be a good thing to discuss sometime. It's a book by Deepak Chopra, and it has the word "The Secret" in the title. Oh man, I'm terrible about this. I have so many books, too many books. But what I find so interesting is that at the beginning, in the first chapter, he talks about cells. And he gives 10 qualities of cells. I guess quality would be the right word, of how a cell in our body how they behave. And like qualities like selflessness and, they're all team players, are the cells in our body. And he talks about, and it's really when you read through the list, because when you read through it at first, you don't know that he's talking about cells.
By the way, I found two books of his that have The Secret in it. One is The Book of Secrets, Unlocking the Hidden Dimensions of Your Life. And the other one is The Secret of Healing, Meditations for Transformation and
No,
Higher
it's the
Consciousness.
first one, the Book
The
of
first
Secrets.
one. Okay.
And he goes on to talk about if we all just lived the way our cells live, like if we behaved the way our cells behave, the way our body behaves on a cellular level. And it's fascinating. Because like I said, when you first read through the list, and I wish I had it in front of me, but I don't. When you first read through the list of qualities, they all sound like, oh yeah, I want to be that way. And it's like, the point is the wisdom that's inherent in our bodies. Like we already have it. We were talking about this morning in a roundabout way that, with talking about listening to that inner voice. Like we already have the wisdom we need inside us.
True.
And our cells are actually smart enough to behave in ways that make the most of our life. And we can emulate that. And that's what the book is talking about. But I think it's interesting to say, okay, LinkedIn works like this. There's these connections, and then your connections are like the second connection. It's like a family tree or something.
Kind of, yeah.
And I feel like, well, everything sort of works that way because we're all connected.
Well, there was a movie a few years back, number of years back, actually, quite a few years back now that I think about it, 6 Degrees of Separation. Isn't that what that's about? 6 degrees of separation, meaning that everybody on the planet is no more than 6 degrees separated from each other in terms of who they're connected to?
Isn't that amazing?
And quite true.
And apparently it's been proven somehow.
I'm not sure how, but I won't dispute it. I mean, it makes sense to me. I just understand how, the multiplication effect happens. So it certainly makes sense to me that given any one person's sphere of influence, so to speak, and who that sphere of influence knows, and then who that sphere of influence knows, the multiplier effect is going to take you to 7 billion people pretty quickly.
Well, I think it's pretty cool to think of any person that you can think of on the planet and think that you're only 6 degrees away from them.
Yeah.
That's kind of amazing.
Well, it shows how we really do live in a small world.
Yes, we
right?
do.
As much as many of us who grew up in that era got sick and tired of that song, it really is true. It's a small world after all.
Oh my goodness, so funny. Speaking of that small world, it's a ride at Disney.
Right.
Right?
Well, it was originally a ride at the 1964 World's Fair in New York.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, see, I grew up in California, so I always went to Disneyland.
Right.
And I've been on that ride many, many times. And as a little girl, it was my favorite. I loved it. It's all full of dolls. I mean, beautiful, hand painted and dressed wooden dolls that are all moving, and it's just gorgeous. And then I grew up and moved away, and then I had kids, and then we live closer to Disney World, which is in Florida. And so when my boys were little, I took them there, and I was so excited to go on the Small World ride. Well, I didn't know this at the time, but the Small World ride in the Florida park is not as big and glorious as the one in the original one.
Oh, really?
It's smaller, and a lot of the cutouts are like flat 2-dimensional, like dolls that are up. It's not. But I didn't know that when I went through it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my goodness, because you know how they say that when you go back to wherever you came from when you were little, it's like, oh, so much smaller than I remember it, right? I thought it was that effect, and I was like, wow, this is. Why did I ever think this was like so amazing? And then I found out like 2 years later, oh yeah, it's totally different.
Right. Well, I actually saw the original at the World's Fair because I grew up in upstate New York. So it was natural to go to the New York World's Fair. We went both years, 64 and 65. And we did see that exhibit both times. I even remember who the sponsor was, believe it or not.
Oh my
The
goodness.
original sponsor was Pepsi Cola, and I mean, can you imagine that? But the fact is, it was also the event, the pavilion that had by far the longest lines, and that World's Fair was known for its lines, long lines that would take hours for people to go through, and people did. They would spend hours and hours in line to go to one pavilion exhibit, and that was one of them. But
Oh,
what was
wow.
amazing about the exhibit for that time was they were using the revolving stage idea. That's how they showed all
Right.
the different aspects of it. And that was novel. That was new at the time. I mean, today that would be like dull and boring by comparison.
Right. That's so funny. Now, did you ride in a little boat through it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. So the exact one you went through is the one that's in the park in California?
That's right. Yeah, that's the one. That's the one they moved over.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
We've been on the same
We
ride.
have. How about that?
I think it's so funny because it really is true that a lot of times when you go back to wherever, you go visit your old school or a city where you were really small and it seems so different.
Mm.
Um, like I've heard that story from so many people that they say they went back to a certain like a park they used to play in when they were little or something, and they're like, "This is it.
This
This
is
is so
it, right?
small. It seems so big when you were only 2 feet tall, right?" And
We had that experience when we went up to Freeport, Maine, which is right up near the Canadian border. And our occasion for going up there was Louise has family who lived up there and some who still live there. And one of them had passed, and we went up there for the funeral. And while we were there, we got to see her grandmother's house. Now, in our circle, this is like a very famous house. This is the house that they went to for their family vacation every year. And it was this really, really big house that she and her brother and her sister and cousins could run around in and play all kinds of games, slide down the banister, all that kind of thing. Well, we got to see the house, which is now a bit run down, and it was so small compared to what she remembered. I mean, it was tiny. She thought of it as this huge house, 3 or 4 stories tall, gigantic rooms, and it just looked like an ordinary house.
isn't that so funny? It's so funny. I remember somebody that I knew that grew up here and had talked about the old Capitol building here, which is kind of the one that's a little bit famous because of the architecture. It's up on a hill, and there are
Hmm.
these like green, grassy, rolling hills that come down that the kids always roll down. Like
Mm.
when you go there on a field trip and you have to roll down the hill, it's just this grassy slope.
All right.
And he went to, I guess, grade school here and then hadn't been back to Louisiana. He actually lived in New England and hadn't been back here since he was a kid. And now he's, an older man. And he came into town, and that's the one thing he wanted to do. He's like, "Well, I want to go to the Capitol. We used to have so much fun. It's got these huge hills we would roll down." And
Right.
we drove up, and he said, "Did they change this?" He
Yeah,
said, "No,
right.
they didn't change it." He said, "That's it, huh?"
Yep.
So it tells us a lot about our perspective, right?
Perspective is everything.
It
Perspective is
is.
what informs our experience. It's what informs our reaction to the experience. That's why Abraham keeps talking about perspective and how important it is and how easily we can change it if we choose to. Because perspective is so incredibly subjective. And it's subjective to a lot of different factors. I mean, the one we're talking about is size and age. But those aren't the only factors. There are, I don't know, an uncounted number of possible factors involved in perspective. And the thing that amazes me the most is that our perspective, without any kind of intention, without even thinking about it, our perspective can change from one moment to the next.
Well, and this is exactly probably why the magic trick works when there's pain in the body, right?
Probably, yeah, that makes sense.
Because all of a sudden we're looking at the pain from a completely different perspective. And it might
Right.
seem like hearing this, method, it might seem like an imaginary perspective, but everything's all in our head anyway.
Hmm.
I mean, literally everything's in our head.
Well, we were talking about Joe Rowling the other day, and one of my favorite lines from all those books, and there are lots of favorite lines. One of my favorites is from the last book when Harry is Voldemort just tried to kill him but didn't succeed in killing him, and Harry is kind of knocked out, and he's in this this imaginary realm that kind of looks like a train station, and he meets not Voldemort, he meets Dumbledore and has a conversation with Dumbledore. And Dumbledore, of course, is dead, right? But he's having this conversation with him. And at the end of the conversation, he says, "One more thing, Professor. Is this real, or is this just happening in my head?" And Dumbledore replies, "Well, of course, Harry, it's happening inside your head, but why on earth should that mean that it's not real?"
Yes. I love that. Because that's exactly right.
Yeah. It summarizes it beautifully.
I like to think that, everything's happening in our head, and we just don't always realize how big it is in there.
Yeah. But the part that I have trouble identifying sometimes is separating in my mind the fact that what seems like reality is actually inside my head and in everyone else's head too. And trying to separate that from this perception that we have that there is this independent, objective reality.
Well, right, because the other part of that, though, is that we can both think we're looking at the same thing and yet perceiving it slightly different.
Right.
It's like that idea of colors.
Yes.
I mean, I think I know what blue looks like, but it might look completely different to you, and we're both identifying it by a word, but I don't know what it looks like to you.
Yeah, how do you describe what blue looks like?
I
don't know how to do it. It looks like blue. It's somewhere between purple and red or something. Not that, but...
And the other interesting thing that I've read about that goes along with this discussion with perception is memory, which pretty much everything's a memory. I mean, it's either because the present moment is not very long, right? I mean, we're always remembering, even things that were just immediately happening become a memory. And when we remember something, we're actually recreating it in our mind again.
Yeah.
And it often shifts and changes just a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Or sometimes a lot.
We might think we're remembering exactly the same way or recounting a story exactly the same way and memory the same way. But every time we remember it, it gets changed a little bit because remembering it is actually recreating it all over again.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And
exactly
that
right.
blew my mind when I found that out because, you can see there was this movie by with Robin Williams in it. And I can never remember the name of it. I want to say it was called The Cutter. Have you heard of that movie?
I don't recognize that one, no.
It was kind of a futuristic movie where they would implant something in your brain, I guess, through your optic nerve or something, where basically your whole life would be recorded by what you were seeing and hearing through your own eyes and ears. And at the end of your life, what they would do is they would have a person that, like the editor or the cutter, whatever it was called, and he was that person or one of those people that would edit, some of your memories and show it at your service, right? Like, 15 minutes to recap, and of course it was really important to pick out the ones that were beautiful because everything was on there. Every sight and vision and, thought you ever had was right there. And they showed this scene, and I hope I recount it correctly, but they showed a scene where this man had passed and they were showing these beautiful scenes of his life. And his brother was there at his memorial watching. And here is a scene of he and his brother in a little boat, I think it was. And the boat was red, and the guy goes, I always thought it was blue. And to me, that was so powerful because I was like, oh, wow. His brother was there with him. They both have a memory of it, and their memories of that same thing were completely different.
Oh, I can think of two particular kinds of examples that really exemplify it. One is the child game of telephone, where you have a whole circle of kids sitting in a circle, and one comes up with whatever the thing is to be passed along and whispers it to the next person, who whispers it to the next person until it goes all the way around the circle. And then the last person tries to repeat what it was, and it's not even close to what the first person said because it got modified a little bit every step along the way. And the other way that I can point to an example that really exemplifies what you're saying is just talk to any trial defense attorney or prosecutor, it doesn't matter, either one, and ask them about what it's like to deal with witness testimonies, eyewitness testimonies from people who are on the scene, who are telling the truth, and who can't get the details straight between them.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
absolute. It blows their mind. I mean, the attorneys go out of their way to see before they go to trial, can they find any connections that the witnesses can agree on? Because if they can, they figure, okay, we'll go with that. Because they
Right. Well,
know all of them are going to see the scene so differently. They'll see
right.
different people involved. They'll see different activities going on. They'll see
Yeah.
different weather systems. They'll see everything different.
Right. It's so true. I heard a study a while back, and now I can't remember exactly how they did it. But it had to do with, I mean, it was staged, but it had to do with like a car crash. And they asked the person who was standing there watching it. I mean, even in a staged version of, okay, we're going to crash this car in front of you. Um, there was something, I think it was in the way they asked the question that the people's answers changed, and even the same person's answer would change.
Yep.
So yeah, it's all it's all very interesting the way our minds work and the way our memories work. And I feel like learning to use the tools that we often talk about on the podcast, it really is sort of hacking our own perception
Kind of. Yeah.
to create something that's better
Mm-hmm. I
in a
mean,
lot of ways. I mean, even like the thing we talked about today with imagining the shape and the color of a pain in your body, that's
right?
kind of hacking your perception.
It is.
And yet it works. So, and I have to say, I am not a doctor. And if you ask yourself the scaling question and you're off the chart, then get professional help.
Yeah, that's definitely a signal that this is way beyond what you're going to accomplish in terms of shifting your perception in 5 minutes. You got to go deal with a severe problem.
Right.
Yes.
But if you're dealing with, aches and pains that are kind of, common in your life already, and you just want to see if you can lower that pain level, then this works great.
Yeah, and I'm going to try it some more. I mean, that's part of the reason I wrote it down because I want to try it. I want to see if I can use this, not just for pain, but for a lot of situations. I can see that being a way to go after a lot of different things going on that we don't like in our lives, not just
Oh,
pain.
that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of using it in any other way.
But can you imagine? I mean, you're dealing with something that makes you angry, and so you start playing with it this way, with this kind of questionnaire. I'll be willing to bet that what the thing that you're angry about changes shape, changes
Would just
color.
dissolve. Yeah,
Yeah.
it will dissolve. Right. Thank you. I'm going to start using this in a different way.
Well, I have to credit Wendy Dillard for that because Wendy has talked similarly, not quite this questionnaire that you had, but similarly about playing with whatever the thing is to make it dissolve itself. So,
Hmm.
yeah, same kind of idea there.
Yeah, if it's all just happening in our head and it's all just energy, then why not?
Sure. Because then the energy is whatever we malleably turn it into, whatever we change it to, whatever we turn the clay into, because
Right.
because we're the ones who are creating it.
That's it. That's a really powerful thing to recognize.
It's hard to recognize. I mean, I've been talking about that now for a few years now. I still can't say I completely recognize it. There's a huge chunk of me that when I see what is, I say, well, that's what is. You know, I'm objectively looking at a computer monitor right now. It has always been a computer monitor. It will always be a computer monitor, and it has nothing to do with me because I didn't make the computer monitor. I mean, how often do I do that kind of thing? Every single day. And yet, there's also the other side that does the podcast that says, you know what, we're creating all this stuff. And about that time is when I start getting the migraine and think, I should probably use the process that Cindie was telling me about.
Well, it reminds me of the whole idea that, since that a molecule is more empty space than anything, right?
Yeah.
And that everything's made up of molecules, and that the chair that I'm sitting on, and the desk that I'm leaning against, and that everything that seems hard and solid is mostly empty space.
Yes.
And it's just the speed at which it vibrates that makes it seem soft like water or hard like a brick. That just that's really hard to get my brain around.
I
But so is the idea that time is not linear,
yeah, that too.
that everything is happening at once.
And I'm not
That's
sure. I don't
kind of
even know what that
mind-blowing.
means, to be perfectly honest. I mean,
Well,
I've
I
heard
tell
that, but I just don't even know. How do you turn that into something that's sensible with that? I don't know how to do that.
it's hard because we are trained and taught from day one of our life that, you know, that time is linear, that there's a before and an after everything.
I mean, I was talking this morning about how I had to explain to spirit guides, look, I see things in terms of a linear time. You got to work with me here. When you're giving me a reply, don't give me the reply while I'm giving you the question. It doesn't work for me.
Stop and just at least pretend you're listening
That's
until I
right.
finish with the question.
And on the other side, I kind of have this imagination of these non-physical beings waiting with bated breath for me to finish so they can give me the answer.
I was just going to say, are they like tapping their non-physical feet and like rolling their eyes at each other? When is he going to stop? When is he going to get done with this question?
Right.
Well, it is a hard concept to grasp because we see everything as before and after, right? It's like, okay, let's catch up after the podcast. Okay,
Right.
before the podcast, after everything's before and after, and we have the sun that sets every evening and rises every morning. I mean, we really do get this rhythm and this sense of time being linear.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when we really recognize that everything in the past is not there, right?
Now I'm getting really depressed.
And everything in the future is just an imagination at this point.
Pretty much,
So
yeah.
really, when we say all there is the present moment, I mean, all there is the present moment. Well, there's a whole bunch of present moments.
Well, to make the matter even more confusing, and this what helps me here is my understanding about computer programming. One of the key concepts that gets used when a programmer is writing a piece of code is the idea of an instance. And an instance is basically a zero time slice. It doesn't really have any duration to it. It can potentially have almost any amount of duration that you want to assign to it, but conceptually it has no time to it at all. And the way that a programmer uses the idea of an instance is in divvying out resources, so to speak, to various users who are doing things with whatever the computer program does. So let's say we are using our computer to connect to the internet, right? In order to make that connection, an instance of that connection is given to us. So we have one instance of it. Now, here's the really interesting part. If you have a whole bunch of instances and they're all of zero duration and they're all happening at the same time, how many instances does it take to have a duration? And the answer is none or infinite or whatever you want. In other words, okay, we talk about duration, before and after. How many instances are there in a duration? I don't know. It's whatever we want it to be because they're all zero width. There's no duration to them.
Division by zero, right?
Yeah,
It's
pretty
like
much, yeah.
Yeah. So oh wow!
If that doesn't drive you
our
crazy, if that doesn't make your mind do backflips and wonder like what the bleep is going on in this universe, nothing will.
Well, but at the same time, it's really encouraging to me because for some reason, it causes me to realize that I really can create anything.
Mm. Yeah.
Because all of that stuff is just, it's wild.
It's crazy. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And yet.
It's all true.
So we really do have the power to create whatever we want.
That's one of the reasons why I continue to try to learn to be a better deliberate creator, because that's how I know we have barely scratched the surface of this deliberate creation stuff. I mean, you and I in particular have talked a lot about Money and the Law of Attraction by Abraham Hicks. We've talked about other Abraham workshops we've heard about. We've talked about a lot of different topics related to the topic of the Law of Attraction. And yet, even in all the things we picked up, and we picked up a lot of stuff and we've shared a lot of stuff with our listeners, great tidbits and ideas and new ways of looking at stuff and so forth to help us become better deliberate creators. And yet, even with all that, I can tell we've just scratched the surface. We have just barely begun to crawl.
Well, I think so. I think that's why the whole idea of, the most of these ideas that are so far over my head, right?
Mm-hmm.
Quantum physics and unified logic and just all of these different division by zero kind of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Of course,
Linear,
they're also.
non-linear time.
Of course, there are also times
Non-linear
when I think that people. I think it was just a head scientist somewhere who's messing with their heads. I think that's what it really is.
Well, but the idea that humans are figuring this stuff out, I mean, I really think that science is just scratching the surface as well.
I think science is scratching their own heads, to be perfectly honest.
I mean, there's so much more to know, and we keep finding out. We keep finding out that the universe is so much, the universes, right? The multiverse is so much bigger than we thought, and new discoveries keep being made. And to me, that's really encouraging because I know I'm just scratching the surface, like you said, of, being able to deliberately create my own reality. If we're all creating our own reality and it's all just happening in our head, then I want to do it deliberately. And
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about this so many times about how much practice it takes. It's a practice, and how we over and over will do the face palm and the forehead slap. Oh, why did I create that?
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're good
But
at that.
to me, that's all encouraging because I know that the more I do this, the better it gets. And the better it gets, the better it gets.
Do you ever feel like that we're kind of like monkeys at a typewriter trying to figure out how to type out the Bible?
No.
You don't? Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that.
I'm going to reject that particular picture.
Good.
Because I don't want to be a monkey and I don't want to type the Bible.
That's true. That has so many assumptions in there that really don't hold true, do they? I mean, just really none of it that you want to have any part of it, to be perfectly honest. And I certainly don't want to use a typewriter. I'm used to computers at this point.
Oh my gosh. That's so funny because, I'm telling my age now, but when I first learned to type, of course, it was on a typewriter and it was on a manual typewriter.
Oh, yeah.
And man, did you have to slam those keys to get that thing to happen.
I was proud of myself. I could type at 40 words a minute, one of those old things. That was fast.
That's really fast because you have to slam those keys so hard, especially if you're typing on carbon.
Yes.
It's like almost impossible. And you had to have really strong hands to do it. So yeah, I'm glad we're not typing anything. I'm really happy for my word processor and my keyboard and computers. But no, I know what you're saying. And yeah, sometimes it feels like a bit of hit and miss, and that maybe a bit of luck is involved. But that's the process, And
it's a good process.
It's like trusting the process.
Yeah. It's a good process because Abraham also reassures us. You'll never get it wrong and you'll never get it done. Well, heck, that means you're free. Just go after it. Doesn't matter what the result is. You're not getting it wrong anyway.
Right? I love remembering that. We can't get it wrong. And we'll never get it done.
And I like flipping it around too, so that it's stated more positively. So the way I state it more positively is we always get it right and the road goes on forever.
I like that.
Yeah.
There are no mistakes.
There are no mistakes.
No, only human experience. And that human experience, doesn't always feel great. But we get better and better as we go along. We get better at practicing. It's all a practice.
And the trick is remembering all of this the next time we catch ourselves, quote, making a mistake, unquote. That's the real test. Can we remember this when that happens? Because if we can, then we found a way to progress past it.
Well, when we begin remembering it, it's an awareness, it's a mindfulness thing. It's an awareness process. Like we make the intention to remember and to be aware. And we might still miss it, but we keep making the intention. And then pretty soon we start seeing it after the fact, like we talked about, saying, oh, why did I create that? Or why did I react like that again? Right? Or, oh, why did I make this same move twice when it didn't work the first time? But see, that's part of the process of recognizing and becoming aware. And then pretty soon we start catching ourselves in the middle. Oh, I just realized I just started to complain about that complainer.
Right. Yep.
I said, this conversation that I had to do. Whoa. Never mind. I'm going to talk about something else. We start catching ourselves in the middle. And then pretty soon we start catching ourselves in the thought process.
Mm-hmm.
We open our mouth and start to tell the story about the complainer, and we just don't do it.
Yeah, the story kind of falls apart.
Yeah, and then pretty soon the first thought that comes to our mind isn't the story about the complainer. And that's the process.
Mm-hmm.
That's the process. It's like, you probably heard this a million times, but it really is applicable. It's like when you see a baby learning how to walk. 2 steps, falls down. 2 steps, falls down. 2 steps, falls down. 3 steps, 4 steps, yay! 5 steps, falls down. Eventually he can walk across the room, and it's one step at a time.
It's funny. I can remember little bits and pieces of being that young, and one of them was what it was like to try not to take 2 or 3 steps, just one. One was huge.
That's amazing. I cannot remember that.
It's not a strong memory, but it's strong enough that I do remember it. I remember looking down. I remember seeing the shoes. Remember those old style baby shoes? I remember seeing those shoes and trying to figure out how it was that the legs move.
Oh, that's so funny. That's great. That's really awesome. One of my siblings has memories that she's recounted of like when she was like 2 years old, and we're all older. So sometimes it's like, oh my goodness, you remember that? Because we remember it because we were older. Yeah. So I think the youngest memory I have, maybe I was 3 or 4. Definitely not though learning to walk. That's cool.
I only know how old I was for this one really, really old memory, just because I know what the distance is between myself and my sister. I'm the oldest and she's a year younger, 13 months younger. And I remember the time when I learned that I had a baby sister, because it was a shock to my system. Because up until that point, it was just me. All the attention was on me. And I knew instantly, all of a sudden, no longer would all the attention be on me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I remember a bit of that too. I was 4 years older, so I got my parents to myself for those first 4 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That's funny.
That's great.
It's all in our head.
That's the part I keep trying to come to grips with. I know theoretically it's all in my head. I know that. I know that atoms have nothing but a whole bunch of space in it. I mean, there are times when theoretical physical scientists can't even find the nucleus. They can't even find the electrons. They're not even sure that they're there sometimes. I'm thinking, well, if they can't find them, I sure can't.
Right.
So we're dealing with all these crazy, crazy paradigms and trying to make sense out of all of them. I guess that's where I'm really grateful for the teachings that we get from Abraham and so forth. But more importantly, I'm grateful for some of the things that we have as our tools, like our emotions. Our emotions give us a way to navigate all this stuff. That's a good thing. That's a really good thing.
I love the question. It either feels better or it doesn't.
Yeah, that's it. And on that happy note, I see that we are running out of time. It's amazing how we did it. We weren't sure how the topic was going to go on this, and I'm not sure I still know what the topic was, but it was fun.
It was fun. And feeling better and feeling good is what matters, right? So
pretty much it. That's it right there. Well, then I look forward to doing it again with you. Let's see, when do we do our next meeting? I guess we do it next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday morning.
Next Tuesday, so I'll do it with you next Tuesday.
Yeah.
All right. I look forward to that.
I do too.
And we hope that you'll come back and join us next time for all of our episodes here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.